Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin. Welcome to GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC. The traditional tournaments of the holiday season generally run through Christmas to New Year's, so there was a bit of a calm before the storm last week, as a lot of these tournaments haven't started yet or just getting under the way. So I will have lots of games from the Nutcracker Match of Generations, which did go to completion. But first, a few thoughts on the World Blitz and Rapid Championships just underway in Saudi Arabia. The prize fund has been bumped up to $2 million, but the choices site has unsurprisingly led to controversy. Foremost is the Israeli question. As we've seen before from FIDe, there was never an admission that Israeli players would not be allowed to play, but every Israeli player who applied for a visa to Saudi Arabia was denied. Many of the top players in the world are not in attendance, but it's unclear how many are boycotting or how many just had scheduling conflicts. Two high-profile boycotters include the defending women's Blitz and Rapid champion Anna Musashuk, who wore the hijab earlier this year in the Women's World Championship in Iran, but bristled at the prospect of wearing a full-body abaya in Saudi Arabia. It was not clear at the time what was going to happen exactly with the traditional dress codes for women in Saudi Arabia with the tournament. And Hikaru Nakamura, who tweeted, "To organize a chess tournament in a country where basic human rights aren't valued is horrible." And I don't think any other Americans are participating either. World champion Magnus Carlsen is there, however. While many in the chess community would like Magnus to take a principled stand, he is well known to be uncomfortable injecting politics into chess. Call it karma if you will, but Magnus is off to a slow start. Lightning has struck a second time, with Carlsen losing in the opening frame of the Rapid tournament to Bu Zhangji, who knocked him out of the World Cup earlier this year. Okay, so we'll start with that. And I'm really going to go through this game pretty quickly because I have a lot on the plate today, but I want to sort of cruise towards the key position. It's an English kind of a Sicilian reversed. And basically it was pretty much even for most of the way. And Magnus starts getting kingside defenses ready. And now bishop f7 is a controversial move. The position is kind of equal, but after that move, Bu is making a play for a big attack by bringing the bishop to h5, but he does allow the rook into d7. And technically, as the computer says, this position is advantageous for white. But here, Magnus Carlsen should have played queen a3, and that would, according to the computer, lead to an advantage. For instance, bishop h5, f3, rook g3, setting up all kinds of sacrifice, and then the rook can retreat to d3 to give support to f3. And white has ideas of bishop c3 to e1 to drive away the rook. It's a very complicated position, but like I said, the computer says white is better. Well, let's see what happened. Carlsen played the queen to e2, a more passive square, and he was ready for f3. He would just sacrifice in exchange. Queen takes bishop h5 and then move the queen. He has a lot of choice there. Maybe just take back with the queen. And the attack is now dead. White has a pawn for the exchange, the bishop pair, active pieces, and stands better. But the problem is Bu is playing for mate. Bishop h5, f3, rook g3. Now threatening bishop takes f3, followed by rook takes h3. So for instance, a move like queen f2, bishop f3, pawn takes, rook takes h3, takes, queen h2, and boom, mate. Right? So after rook g3, king h2 to give support to h3, but the problem is this. And that is where queen a3 would make the difference, because white would be able to play c5 with the queen on a3. But here, there's no way to cover g1, so black is threatening bishop f3, massive threat, and c5. Also, what Magnus did here was a bit mysterious, because he just did not defend against rook takes h3. Resigned after that move. Rook takes h3 would lead to mate on g1. So, terrible debacle in the first round for Carlsen. Then he won a game and he drew a game. And since then he started to win. Of course, the games are, a lot of games are being played today. Last I looked, he was up to, I think, 3.5 out of 5. It's a long tournament. He has a chance to come back, as is the case with other players like MVL and Aronian, who got off to slow starts. But we'll see how that goes, and I'll have more on that tournament next week, and perhaps more of the flavor of how the logistics worked out. All right, the Nutcracker Match of Generations matched older and younger teams in men's and women's divisions. The Princes defeated the Kings 32.5, 31.5, while the Queens vanquished the Princesses 33.5 to 30.5. I'm just wondering if those scores maybe even were reversed, as this is how it was reported. I'll have more on that later. The Kings looked good in the classical portion. There was classical chess and rapid chess, as Shakhyar Mamedyarov rallied his team of Boris Gelfand, Alexei Shirov, and Sergei Rublevsky to a 9-7 edge. Let's see how Mamedyarov posted 3.5 out of 4 with a couple of nice wins. First up is Mamedyarov against Daniel Yufa. Okay, so Shak Mami playing white. And he goes for a flank opening, which is often a good idea against young players. And Yufa gets a kind of a strange idea. Bishop f5. I'm not sure what he's thinking about, because this leads to loss of material after g4. Maybe for whatever reason he was only considering knight h4, and then black could answer knight takes g3, and maybe he was calculating something like this, e4, and thought that this would be good for him somehow. But the simple response, g4, I mean, white takes 2 pieces for rook, black gets 1 pawn, but in a middle game position, 2 pieces should really dominate a rook, so it's kind of strange. a4, I guess, trying to trade a pair of rooks, because the minor pieces work more effectively if they have 1 rook to work with, whereas 2 rooks is not the same kind of advantage, having that second rook if you already have one. So basically, position is favorable for white. And queen a5, Mamedyarov could trade queens with an advantage, but he decides to play for more with queen e3. The black king side is a little loose. He gets out of the pin. Queen takes pawn. Doesn't necessarily have to take this pawn, but I think that it's okay. Does allow some counterplay with queen c3. Knight e4 takes rook d1. All right, so the computer says that white should just trade and play bishop g2. And okay, black has to make sure white doesn't attack f7. So king g7 is a good move. Queen takes b7, rook a1. So this is, I'm sure, what Mamedyarov was worried about, is that his a pawn is vulnerable, and that black could make a past a pawn. It's probably very good for white, but it's, from a human standpoint, it's not necessarily that attractive. So he plays queen e7. preventing black from taking on g1 because then the other rook will hang with check. But actually here, you for blunders, he could stay in the game with rook, no, actually retreating the rook to d7. This is where rook on 1 to d7, in the old days, rook on 1 would be the back rook, but algebraic notation is from white point of view, of course. I did learn descriptive notation as a child, so I had experience with that. And if queen c5, rook e8, black gets some counterplay attacking on the e file. The computer actually argues that white should not take the pawn and actually just retreat to e4, offering to repeat the position one time. So that would have stayed in the game. After king g7, it's not really that hidden combination for white, take on g6 and rook takes. Very cute, but like I said, not that difficult. And after king takes knight e5, black resigns. If he takes the knight and takes the bishop, white can pick up a rook with queen e4, boom. And if he doesn't take the knight, it's going to be mate either queen f7 or queen f6 check, which depending on where you go, and king f5. This is a fun one. There are other ways to win, but e4 check is a very nice mate. It's just nice when you can finish a game with e4. You play e4 and your opponent resigns. On the first move doesn't happen too often, but be kind of cool on move 29. So kind of a lightning attack there for Mamedyarov, and after a strange sacrifice in the opening by young Daniel Yufa. So we're going to see another Mamedyarov game. As he took out Andrei Esipenko with some nice combinative play. All right, so Esipenko, Mamedyarov, it eventually gets into a Slav, Moran, or anti-Moran with queen c2. There's a lot of different ways this can go, b5, and sometimes black plays early c5, sometimes he waits a little bit, and with white playing e4, then we instead get e5 happening. And g5, well, that's a bold move. I like it. As black starts to gain control of the center, a nice queenside majority. And here, probably the objectively best move is c4 with the idea of knight d3. Still, it's maybe bishop e3, maybe an equal position with equalish position with proper play. Mamedyarov plays knight d7. I mean, from a human standpoint, I almost feel like this is a better move because what white needs to play here is not so obvious. From a human standpoint, black is threatening to bring the rook down here. Is white should play bishop e3 here, and according to the computer, this is approximate equality. If black takes on g3, the idea white takes, the bishop hangs. Actually, this works out quite poorly because after rook a d1, now white has this pin on the knight, which black can't take care of right away because then he'll lose the bishop on g3, and otherwise white will pile up on it again. Maybe black could play rook takes e3, but I think the problem is after pawn takes, he may have to lose the c pawn to deal with the pin. Well, actually, then he won't have the rook back there to defend d8, so it could be even worse. So not bishop g3. So black should play knight f6, but then the rook will retreat, and let's say it retreats maybe all the way back. Bishop takes g3, but now white can take queen takes c5, and he lost that pawn from his king side, got rid of black's majority, and has two bishops. So the position is not entirely clear. But Esipenko, I guess, did not see those possibilities, and he went for, I don't know if it's desperate or ambitious or whatever, I guess he was hoping to get some attack on the king side, but the problem is that the rook on the back rank stuffs white's position. The bishop on c1 can't get out, and black is just able to build up an attack. And he can play some brazen moves like h5, because the bishop on c1 is pinned. So he just creates all this pressure on g3, and pretty soon we have a breakthrough. Queen c5 threatening mate, h4, and boom, now bishop g3, queen g1 could also be played first. Queen takes, check, and rook d3. This is a crusher. Bishop f3, and now black has various ways of ending it. Queen f1 is also good. King g4, f5, and then it's possible to take on f3. The queen can't really do anything. Also, another way to do it was g4 check, and if king takes g4, f5 check, king f3, h3, and queen f1. Basically, we're getting into territory where black is, according to the computer, more than a rook up. So, you know, all of these work about equally well. But Mamadjarov played the simplest, probably just took and just no variations, and queen h1 and rook g1, and that led to resignation. If you want to take it a little bit further, after king f4, okay, if rook takes queen, black is completely winning with the queen for two rooks. You know, the bishop is still pinned and everything, but technically, you know, black can get that queen without giving up anything. King g5, queen e5 is mate, and now you can actually move away from the queen. If king e4, f5 wins the queen, and if king e3, queen e5, so queen e4, rook e1, the king moves queen d5, and mate will occur on the d3 square. So, yeah, totally over in that final position where white resigned. Okay, so Mamadjarov looking good early. But the princess rebounded in the rapid portion, although actually I'm not sure chronologically which came first, where their younger reflexes made a difference. The team of Daniel Yufa, Andrei Esipenko, Grigory Oparin, and their fearless leader Vladimir Artemiev edged their elders in the match by outscoring them 18.5, 13.5 in the rapid. Now the final numbers, as I see, don't seem to match up, so perhaps there was weighted scoring in this event. I'm not entirely sure about that. Now Artemiev 6.5 out of 8 led the way. Let's take a look at his opportunistic play. First, a very juicy one against Gelfand. Okay, now remember, Gelfand has a long time been a great theoretician, so Artemiev plays very cheeky. Of course, this is rapid. So, you know, experimentation in the opening is common. But actually, Artemiev gets an okay position in the opening. But his experienced opponent does outplay him for a while. You know, so far it's fairly even. Maybe even black was a tiny bit better in some moments. Bishop c5, I'm not sure how good that move was. Queen e4, that seems to be a mistake. The queen maybe should go back to d6, and black is in good position to get in the move e5 and get the pawns rolling. In this type of structure, you don't want to get them blockaded, and I think that maybe miss this move, rook e5, because if the queen takes h3, rook h5 traps the queen. So that meant that queen f5 did not pick up a tempo. And when the queen went back, white is able to kind of lock in the blockade and now stands better. You know, he gets to cover everything. And now it's a position where white is sitting on him. There's a little bit of maneuvering for a while. And then comes queen f3, which, maybe that was a little bit of a rushed move. Right now, black isn't doing much. Probably Gelfand regretted not, putting the rook on the second rank just to guard that, whereas king is first. But it looks like a position where nothing much is going to happen. But Artemiev, understanding that he's under a lot of pressure here, he's very passive, makes a break for it, a good practical move, especially in a rapid game. So when Gelfand takes, rook comes check. Now, if white interposes, this is the safest move, but now black has freed his position a little bit and is not in trouble anymore. So Gelfand wanted to move the king, but he should have moved the king to the back rank. Let's say king f1. Now, this is not really very natural, but the idea is that now rook takes d4 can be met by rook takes e6. And okay, so we get a position with two rooks for the queen, but doesn't end there, as some things are hanging. Queen e5 check, king c4, queen e6 check, king d3. And these moves are basically forced if black doesn't want to lose a rook. And then at the end, queen takes h5. White king is uncomfortable in the back rank, but with that h-pawn going away now, the king could potentially escape up to h3 and g4, and white has three connected passed pawns. So I think it looks good. It looks good for white, unless there's a real surprise later. But that possibility only works with the king on the back rank. I mean, it's more natural to play king h3. But now after rook takes d4, white does not have this rook takes e6 possibility because of queen f5 check, and then black wins. So plan B, after rook d4 check, and well, here he needs to, that move is okay, but now he should play some defense with rook e2. Sometimes psychologically this kind of move is a little difficult because you feel like you should punish black for playing d4 from that passive position. But, safety first, not a bad idea. Queen check, this is really ill-advised because after rook d2, white can defend this mate either by playing rook h1 right away or by, as Gelfand played queen h8 check and then queen h1. But in both cases, white becomes so tied up that he's not really in position to win the game. But both of those were a lot better than what Gelfand did. He checked, and then he defended with the rook. The problem was that allowed queen takes f4, gold coins. If you take the queen, there's a mate. Rook d3 leads to mate as the king is boxed in. Now, if white had played rook h1 without giving that last check with the king on f8, he would have a check with the queen on a3, and then he can take the queen because he's guarding the mate on the third rank. But as it was played, queen takes f4 is a crushing move. Gelfand checked and came back queen e4, but now, boom, queen f1, and that's it. If you take the queen, rook h2 is mate. So some cute mating tactics at the end. Gelfand just kind of losing the handle there, but credit Artemiev for realizing that he had to take a chance in the position, and was rewarded for it. So, these sometimes the raw talents don't have the experience, but in the fast games, it's tougher for the old guys. All right, so that was one win for Artemiev, and in the rapid portion, Mamedyarov was not so successful, as Artemiev had his number in both games. We'll take a look at the first one, where Shach overpressed and was felled by a vicious counterattack. So this is, again, kind of a flank opening, King's Indian. It looks like a Grunfeld, but we actually end up what was kind of a ubiquitous answer to the G3 in the King's Indian for quite a while, I think led by Dr. John Nunn, but it would often lead to this symmetrical business, which was kind of boring. And there were a lot of games like this. Now white can play f4. Mamajev goes back. I don't know, maybe there's some kind of test that maybe black will play knight c6, and white likes that better, but he returned the knight to f6 and then jumped in. And now it's actually Artemiev that avoids repeating, which is quite interesting. And so Mamajev gives up the bishop pair to get some space. Probably h5 was ill-advised. I think he should maybe have left it there and gotten pieces mobilized. Artemiev just takes it. You know, with club players, it's almost a reflex to play g5 to push past. Like, oh yeah, of course you don't take it. But sometimes pawn is a pawn, and Mamajev will be haunted by giving up that pawn in a few moves. Now he's retreating under some pressure on the d4 pawn, and that allows Artemiev to chase the other knight, and now h4. Of course, white always has this idea that he's going to take that pawn with the knight or the queen, but white can't avoid the pawn capturing without losing the pawn on d4. And as the pawn captures rook g8, black has a very nice game. So Mamajev tries to attack the knight first, but then Artemiev very smartly takes on g3. If white takes back, he's just lost the pawn for nothing. So he grabs the knight. But this position, after bishop takes c6, and possibly e5 first was even stronger, but the bishop takes c6 is very difficult for white to play. 3 pawns, bishop pair, king wide open. White could play something like bishop h3, the idea of e5, bishop f5 check. So with perfect play, white might not be that badly off, but I think practically speaking, white is going to lose this position most of the time. As you know, any kind of misstep, it's easy for black to play, just make aggressive moves. And queen c4 right there is a blunder. I guess he wants to stop queen c5, but he leaves his king side open, queen d6. I think black could play bishop d4 check immediately, but this sort of makes sense. And here also bishop d4. This is kind of cute. Bishop d4, knight takes queen f4 check. There's a lot of things going on. If the king retreats to the back rank, boom, this rook on c1 is hanging. But the knight can't come to f3 because then the queen is hanging. So basically, total collapse. But Artemiev just played very simply. You know, it's just a good policy, especially in fast games, to give check on h2. And I think that was the end of the game. The king goes back, the bishop on f3 hangs, because black is minimum up 3 pawns. If bishop g2, bishop d4 check, king e1, and now there's a couple of ways to mate. Simplest queen g1, bishop back, queen g3, and mate next move. So Artemiev getting the better of Mamajev. And in the second game that they played, Artemiev also won. This is where he got a superior endgame, bishop to opposite color ending, and he won after many moves, more than 60 moves deep. So he showed some versatility, but Artemiev was very, very tough in the rapid portion. So the young guns are able to eke out a win over the veteran players there. All right, well, let's just give one final game from that event. I'd like to conclude it with a little fire on board from Alexei Shirov. Now, Shirov's rating has plummeted down to 2631. I haven't really been keeping that close a track, but of course he was over 2,700. He was at one time he won the right to play a match against Kasparov that just never got scheduled. Very unfortunate. But he was one of the very top handful in the world. So his rating's gone down quite a bit as he gets older. It's some players maintain their level better than others, but he's still able to bring it on occasion. So let's check out Shirov being Shirov, Esipenko Shirov. Okay, this one is also going to be another Slav anti-Moran. So here the bishop goes to e2, a3, a5. So this is, you know, different variation. There's a lot of versatility in all this. Now at first it actually goes pretty well for white. Knight g6 move. I have not checked the database on this, but the engine says that black should play bishop c5. That's a very interesting idea, is that very often black kind of switches the attack to f2 rather than h2. And, you know, if that knight moves, it could be, you know, like there's possibilities of knight coming to g4. So bishop c5 seems to keep the balance. The attack on h2 actually falls flat because white can block that. And black doesn't really have a great follow-up. Knight f5 is an accurate move. And in this position, black is trying to make something going on the king side. But after f3, you know, white is in good shape here. And if Esipenko plays bishop e3, he actually has a clear advantage. He has all that pressure on the queen side. I don't know if black's going to be able to hold on to the material, and everything is covered on the king side. It looks covered very well now, but after the move bishop c4, things change, because that allows this strong move bishop d4. Okay, he blocked that c-pawn nicely, but he overlooked this move. And now there's some problems. If white takes the bishop, pawn takes b3, that allows the knight to jump into e5. Still, this would have been better than what happened in the game. White can play queen f2 or queen e2, but I think that black has an initiative here and is doing pretty well. You know, of course, white has to be careful with his knight on a4, can easily get out of play, and it does in the game. All right, also better than what white did would be king f1. And again, knight e5, I think black is doing well, but king g2 was bad news, because now Shirov makes a rather obvious sacrifice to get on this long diagonal, but I guess Esipenko overlooked something here after queen e5. If knight takes d4, bishop e4, knight f3, black can simply take the queen and then take back on e5. And at the moment, white is a piece up, but he has 1, 2, 3 pieces attacked. So obviously something is going back in the other direction, and well, black has a winning position. So he tries bishop d5, of course. If you defend e4, the knight in f5 is hanging by the pin. So bishop d5, now this long diagonal, forces the king to h3. Queen f3, here white can barely move. He tries to chase the queen, check, and now rook e8, threatening to invade with the rook. If rook d2, the rook can come into e1 again, actually threatening mate on g1, not very nice. So bishop e3, but now the knight jumps in, knight g4, bishop d4, and black can actually take this pawn in h2, king f3, queen back to h5, threatening a nasty discovery. And if king g2, c takes d4, would actually be the same position in the game with the h-pawn missing, even a bigger disaster for white. Knight g7, black has knight h2, king g2, rook e2, and if king h1, you don't take the queen, but you go knight f3 check, and rook h2. This would be a nice finish, of course. But, you know, you want to win the games, right? And especially in a team tournament, I know that when I've been in team tournaments, I never want to get too fancy and mess up and have all my teammates mad at me. So Shirov just took back the bishop. Because after h3, he takes the knight, and if white takes the queen, he can win that back with a fork. So he plays. Yeah, queen takes, pawn takes, check, and if the king comes back to the first rank, black will just take the knight and a4 and come out with at least one extra pawn and still a big initiative. But at the king h3, back to the mating attack, rook e2. Not the first game we've seen this week with heavies lining up on the second or seventh rank. Queen g1, and now queen back to g6, preparing for queen h6 mate, and really no way to stop it. So Esipenko resigned. So nice attacking game for Shirov. It's true that Esipenko made a couple careless moves there to allow it, but still nice to see from Alexei Shirov. All right, that about does it for this week, and you might say this year. As next show, it will be 2018. We will also be a day later with the show because of New Year's Day. We'll let everybody celebrate there before we get back to work. But I just want to wish everybody a happy New Year and all the best in 2018. And of course, I hope you guys will continue to enjoy this show. I hope you like this one. And I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, wishing you a happy New Year and hoping you will join me next year, on GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC. Goodbye, everyone. Happy New Year.